everybody. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and today I am very, very excited about our chat. I feel like I say that every week, but I'm being completely honest when I say I'm excited for all of the chats that I'm being able to have with all these amazing people. And so this one does not change that excitement level that I have seemingly just flowing through me every single week for what's going on here. But we have a special episode because we're going to be talking about biblical plants. Now, this is a subject that, I sort of have a little bit of knowledge about because I know that plants play a big role in the Bible, in the history of all of us and the universe. But our friend Joshua the Branch actually reached out to me a couple weeks ago, posing the idea to have a show about this because he has a vast knowledge about the Bible and the things attached to it and stories and symbols and plants as well. And so he thought it would be a really great idea to have a chat about this. And I fully agree with that. And when I let Mario know about this idea, he was on board too. So tonight we have Joshua the Branch and my man Mario of Symbolic Studies with us. So without further ado, help me in welcoming these two gentlemen to the stream. Hey, fellas.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Hello. Indeed, it's good to be here. Nice to come across your path once again, Joshua. Thanks for coming around and proposing this idea. It's a really great one.
It's a pleasure. I really enjoy having discovered this community with the spiders and such because, I've gotten so many opportunities to discuss topics like this with others, and it's just a real joy. I would even say I've been studying the love languages lately, and they say there's only 5, but I would say there's a 6th one. I'd say conversation is one, because if you can be stimulated intellectually, that I think is sometimes a necessary component there. So thank you for sharing the love.
Absolutely. And it's appropriate timing for a few reasons, right? I mean, we're going to be doing an astro-herbalism series, continuing that on Interverse tomorrow, talking Aries, plants and herbs. And then Palm Sunday was recently, and then Easter is right around the corner, and then the spring equinox, and just all of that stuff. So I just think the timing here is awesome as well.
Yeah.
And I'm an Aries, birthday's Thursday, and your name's Mario. And
that's right.
It's all very well themed. Yes.
Well, happy early birthday.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Very cool. Well, Joshua, I obviously, and Mario and I both know you through the Spiders community, Interverse community, the great people that we all have around us. But for some of the people that are listening or will tune in later who might not, or who aren't familiar with you, can you just give us a little introduction about yourself? And also, I'd love to know within your introduction how you how have you developed your relationship with the Bible? Was it something natural? Were you raised with religion, or was it something that you found in your life on your own?
Well, I guess I can start with how that relationship with my religion, as it were, began. I was first exposed to church because my uncle decided to help put together a swing set in my yard. And he said if he put it together, I had to go to church. And it was just that one time. And so, there I agreed. And thus the swing set led to me going to church at one time. Now, I only went a couple times, but then it was years later. I started walking to church, to this country Baptist church. So, getting to look at plants the whole way, living in West Virginia. And also having been a Boy Scout, I kind of became acquainted with trees and plants, especially edibles and useful plants. And then, of course, my grandmother got me into things like astrology and herbalism and things like that. So, a lot of ways, I think that it was just natural for me to get into religious and occult studies because, my whole life I've kind of been learning that language without really knowing it. It was the green language the whole time, So And then, of course, the older I got, the more I realized that this is a prevalent theme through texts, and oftentimes it's like a language in of itself. And I got into Freemasonry and things like that, and learned about how Solomon also was acquainted with this language and the language of the birds. Hey, Rachel, and things of that nature. So I guess through my everyday life, we're kind of taught to, chisel away at the bad parts and such. And anyway, I became a graduate with a psychology degree at one point too, and began to really apply the things I was learning. And I'm still doing like social work now, so it's really fun when I can actually use some of the stuff I learn with clients, like if they're interested in religion or herbalism or tea or anything like that. It's just really fulfilling to be able to help them develop that kind of interest, just like it was for me whenever I was maybe that age, or anybody that's at that point in their life. So it's a little eclectic, but aren't we all?
That's awesome. I love that story of the swing set.
Yeah,
That's
right.
cool. Yeah, I mean, he was looking out for you in multiple ways by doing that, regardless of what someone's opinion is on a religion or going to church or whatever it is. Family sends us these little lines, throughout our lives, and sometimes we grab onto them, and these lines like really influence us in our lives in ways that we would have never imagined, right? And more than family does that for us too, friends and acquaintances and neighbors, whichever. And so I think those little stories that come along with, the way that we develop as people are really important. So thanks for sharing that. And that's really cool. Is the swing set still around in any yard where it was or originally constructed?
No, it was there for a season. I don't know how long, but it served its purpose. It has long since decayed into time memorial. But my uncle's name was Calvin, so I guess you could say he was a Calvinist.
Nice
religion joke there. But yeah, I mean, that's the labor that I when you apply the plants to like alchemy and spiritual working, the labor that we perform is a lot of times likened to these parables in the Bible. So I think it's very interesting too to kind of compare how we are like trees and shrubs, and it takes time to bear fruit. Like whatever skill you practice, whatever habit you have, eventually becomes fruit, good or bad. So having this understanding, I think, mixed with psychology really helps it make a lot of sense, because I see the Bible as being like an instruction manual for living in life, but it's got a lot of hidden language in it too. So hopefully we can crack a little bit of that open this evening.
Yeah, I think we're going to. And, because we've got some stuff, we've got ground to cover, I say let's just jump on into it if you guys are ready.
Leap of faith.
Sure.
All right, Let's go for it. So we created a little slideshow just so we can get some context going on here. So up on the screen is a list of plants that Joshua had sent to me that he found. All these plants basically are mentioned in the Bible at some point. And so when he sent me this list of plants, because just to preface, I am not familiar with the Bible. I was never really raised with a religion, or was never raised in, pushed towards anything, for better or for worse. I look at it as a blessing in a lot of ways, because I was able to explore a lot of things on my own without feeling pressure or whatever. But then there are things where there's holes in some of my areas of study, because I've never really taken a lot of time to, I've never invested a lot of time in studying the Bible. But I will say that this right here, the research I've been doing and this list here, has made me want to. So for whatever that's worth, I'm intrigued. I'm very intrigued. And so what an amazing list. I mean, this is so cool. And so, Joshua, when you came across this, or when you compiled this, what are some of your thoughts about the plants that you see here on the list?
Well, one that I didn't actually prepare for, but just took note of right here was cotton. The linen that's produced from that is supposed to have a healing effect. And they say that linen on a bed and linen clothing, if you're recovering from surgery, that'll enhance the healing effect. So I think, of course, it wasn't until later in life I learned about like different associations with things. Plants have different associations and such, but it made me wonder, like, what is it about cotton that does it vibrate on some type of frequency that enhances that? It always made me wonder. So I think a lot of these plants all do that in their own way. It's just that cotton happens to manifest its healing power in that way. So that would be one that kind of jumps out at me. And you mentioned the palm a little bit ago too. So I've read about the date palm, how each month it sprouts a new branch. So that would mean like each month it would sprout a new branch. And so I wonder if the date came from the fact that it's almost like a calendar. If you think about it, you would know what month it was just by counting the number of branches. And I don't know, maybe that's where the date came from, right? So again, I think the language that's embedded into some of these things, they still affect us today, just like cereal and series, for instance, just for a non-biblical example, but they crop up still to this day, pun intended, I guess.
Yeah, that's great, man. I'm just thinking, we're going to get into this list and we're going to get into some slides with these 10 specific plants and everything. But my mind already, I'm thinking about the doctrine of signatures, and I'm thinking about what these plants look like and how we use them and everything else, and how there is that signature quality of correspondence between what they look like and how we relate to it and what it does for humanity and for humans, right? So I'm just thinking with cotton as an example, I can't not think of how fluffy cotton looks, how it feels. It reminds me of clouds. There's kind of this purity sort of thing that comes with it. And so it makes me think of all of these sorts of ideas. And emotionally, I almost kind of resonate with this healing thing. Although, to be completely honest, I've never even thought about cotton from like a doctrine of signature sort of standpoint or anything else. But what you're saying there totally makes sense. I think that's really, really interesting. So anyways, that's where my head's at with everything already.
Even kind of reminds me of a lamb, if you think about it. And there are some plants called like lamb's ear, for instance, which I didn't find in the Bible, but it would be used for wound dressing and stuff like that. So there must be some type of, you're right, I think the law of signatures does apply here. And that's basically the Twilight language in a sense too. Because there are some of these things, like the almond, for instance, is used on the menorah. So whenever, I guess we'll be looking at a slide might be on that. Maybe we can talk about it more then, but
sure.
But
yeah, excellent.
Yeah, this is great because I love the idea of the Twilight language that you had mentioned and we talked about in our private chat, that, sometimes these things, these plants and trees or whatever are veiled within the Bible. So they might use the word almond, or maybe it's even, a different word might be used for it, but its meaning a certain plant. And so one of my plant connections with the Bible has been through cannabis. And now cannabis isn't up on this list. And I think it's not well known that it could possibly have been in the Bible because it's more of a veiled reference, and it's within a Twilight language. And so, it's been from different researchers, particularly a guy, Chris Bennett, Liber 420, great book. If you're wanting to know more about this, cannabis, magical herbs, and the occult, he really goes in depth. Him and other researchers talking about how cannabis seemingly was used quite a bit back in biblical times, as anointing oils, as incense, as ways to communicate with higher beings. It was reserved for perhaps the priest class, things like that. And it's been seen that it is referenced as cannabosum, and that is the Hebrew word for cannabis. And so anyway, I'm not sure if you've heard of any of these things, Joshua, but to me, this is where my line starts with plants in the Bible, because they also talk about, more psychoactive plants like some of the nightshades, mandrake, for example. Belladonna is mentioned in the Liber 420 book, and thoughts that, these plants were used in order to open up channels to communicate with people like Moses and things like that, and used as incense to create more of a psychoactive experience. So I'm not sure if you or anybody else in the chat is even familiar with this stuff, but it's a really interesting line of research that's taken my attention to many places, and it's very interesting.
Well, it reminds me of the land of Canaan, and because it's kind of got the same base word there. So I wonder if where it's really from. Do we really know its point of origin? Because it could have been there. And if you really think about it, in that land, the grapes grew huge, and so on and so forth. So if you can only imagine, what a cannabis plant, I guess, would look like in the land of Canaan during those times when everything was giant. It could have been that what we have now is some diminutive version of what was once huge, and it reminds me of a couple Bible verses too. In Ezekiel 47:12, it talks about, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of nations. And of course, in Genesis 2:9, it talks about how out of the ground the Lord gave growth to every tree that is pleasing to the eye and good for food. So when he's talking about the tree of knowledge of good and evil and tree of life, the only one we're told not to eat from is the tree of knowledge and good and evil. So if this were a tree in a sense, then it would seem like it's acceptable. But society, however, kind of demonizes it. So I know a lot of people that get healing from it. So if we're looking at it from the law of signatures side, it has 5 leaves, right? So that would look like a palm, kind of similar to, again, we're talking about the date palm a moment ago, and now palm shape. But I would think that the law of signatures maybe has something there. So maybe applying the hand to it could maybe gain us some insight there.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I know for a fact we have a date palm slide, so I'll reserve some of my thoughts when we get there, because I particularly know a lot about that connection, and that's kind of my relationship with a lot of biblical stuff. Actually, it came via astrology, and then I just started noticing all these different connections with different storylines and did further research and stuff. So that's something that I'll definitely expand on when we get there.
Yeah, right on. No, I think you're right with because the canna equals cane reed. So and then balsam is aromatic. So obviously most people know that cannabis flower is very highly fragrant. So to me it kind of makes sense. It was sometimes translated in the Bible as fragrant cane. So just something to think about. But I'm liking where your mind is going and where you guys are where we're going to be heading. So, yeah. If do you have anything else to add about the Twilight language, Joshua, that you wanted to make sure to get in?
It just occurred to me, you got broom behind you. It's on the list there. It's on your wall.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice.
So the signatures apply there too. It just its structure is what makes it useful. So sometimes when we're talking about these, it might become apparent why it's useful for some reason. Like for instance, Hyssop, we'll be talking about more on Friday, and how it was used in Passover. It wasn't until I saw a video of somebody using it to baste chicken that I was like, oh, okay, that's how you use it, and so we can talk more about that Friday, but some of these were actually tools and things like that, like the broom behind you. So again, I think that when something's being mentioned, we got to think about what its use was. We have to think with the mind that they had, and we think with our today mind. And I think that's where the disconnect kind of comes from sometimes. And the Twilight language itself, I mean, if you think about it, you got the dawn of creation, which is very much like Twilight. And then you had your 6th day of creation, and then it ends with the seventh day beginning at the twilight. So I kind of see the day of rest when we're contemplating God and, creation and reflecting on our labor. It's kind of a time when we really study this twilight language in a sense and reflect. So I think there's a lot packed into these words. They say like a picture can tell 1,000 words, but I think a plant can too in that way. So when we just read, we kind of read through it over in a verse, but if we really unpack it, there's the horticulture and how it breeds and how it grows and how long it takes to make fruit and how it pollinates. I mean, there's so much wisdom packed into all of it. And I think that's why Solomon was so wise, is because he knew this language. So, and of course, Christ, used a lot of parables with plants. So I think it's just maybe God's way of talking to us in a way. Maybe it goes back to Adam. The Adamic language is the green language or the twilight language. So it really goes back to him and his taxonomy of all the animals and plants and so on and so forth. So they each belong to different kingdoms and phylums. And it's just, we're still doing today what Adam, started way back when. Linnaeus would be proud, I'm sure.
Nice. Yeah. And then, we're talking about the green language and we're dealing with plants, right? So that's interesting. And then I'm just noticing a lot of these words here, just like when we do our astroherbalism stuff, the amount of information you can take away just from the name, as you're saying, there's a lot of words that have double meanings here. Bay, as an example. Castor, I think of Castor and Pollux, even I was just noticing pomegranate. Is that a palm reference? Kind of fits snugly in the palm of your hand, or you can hold it in the palm of your hand sort of thing. So wormwood, that's really an interesting name as well. But yeah, good stuff, man.
Palm of your hand, just like the Globus Cruciger post you made.
Yeah,
today.
That's right. Yep, yeah. Exactly, which we always see the emperors holding that Globus Cruciger, which corresponds with Aries. Yeah, definitely.
And it has a crown on it too, the pomegranate. So that kind of is a reference to the royalty. Is that one of the ones on the list? I didn't want to talk too much about it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's one of the top 10. No, you're all good. I have a lot to say about the pomegranate too. It's one of I feel like I have a personal sort of connection with the pomegranate. So I kind of grew up with it, and then we'll talk about it when we get there.
Right on. Well, let's move on to the slides then. Seems like we're wanting to grab for some of the plants that we have slides for. So let's get it started then. All right. So first on the list, we have fig. Beautiful fig.
Those are our fine looking figs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good picture too, because some of the verses that we have for fig references maybe being ripe or not being ripe. So to have both on here is kind of nice. This one in the bottom that's purple, that's typically what a ripe fig looks like. And of course, this one to the right is not quite ripe. So yeah, let me find I got some fig verses here. So, I guess I should start off with Luke 6:44 first, because a good way to transition from the twilight language to what we're studying now. So it talks about how for every tree is known by its fruit, by its own fruit, for men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. So in other words, he's talking about how, what natural law is, when you see it, like, if you know your plants anyway, you're going to know what it's going to look like. And so if you're a gardener and something's in your garden that you didn't put there, you're going to probably notice, right? And so this person's Luke's using this here as a way of saying, use your common sense, and this fig here is very interesting, because when we go to Genesis 3, when it's talking about the fall of Adam and Eve, because they eat from the tree of the knowledge and good and evil. Well, it never says that it's an apple, although in modern day society, it's often depicted as an apple. But right after they do this, they take fig leaves, which you can see here in the background, and there's different patterns of the fig. One of them looks kind of like a hand, or like a mitten, actually. Reminds me of sassafras in some ways. But anyway, they take fig leaves and sew them together over their private parts, because somehow the fig gave them self-awareness of, the fact that they were naked. And I think, of course, there was a sexual element perhaps there, at least with the serpent. And we did some Genesis studies, of course, that talk about how Cain was actually born after Abel. I thought they were twins in the womb, but not so. Anyway, so that's all kind of tied together in that story. So how does the fig, we wouldn't normally associate a serpent with the fig, but there we kind of have it in that story. And what's interesting about the fig is we read about it in Genesis. We read about it in the middle part of the Bible, with Christ talking about the parable of the fig tree in several of the Gospels. And in that, there are, let me see, I got Mark 11:13. So, seen in the distance a fig tree and leaf, it's talking about Christ here. He went to it to find out that it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Well, I never really understood that verse until I started going to the Greek Orthodox Church. And they happen to have a fig tree planted outside of the church, which is, again, funny, because I often wonder how many people that go to that church ever really stop and look at the fig tree that's right outside. But anyway, so when we're reading this, it's talking about the season for figs. Well, I watched that tree every Sunday I went, and it looked like this right here, in like late summer, early fall. So around September is when it's looking like this right here. So what I think is interesting about that is because when you look at Nahum 3:12 and Revelation 6:13, I know I'm talking a little bit about, not all the plants are this heavy. We just happen to be starting with like a prophetic plant. Sorry.
Oh, you're all good. Yeah.
Yeah. This is awesome.
But, well, yeah, it's like heavy. But so Nahum 3:12, it says, all your fortresses are like fig trees with their first ripe fruit. When they are shaken, the figs fall into the mouth of the eater. So this right here looks like a good depiction of that verse. Wouldn't you agree? Where that bottom fig would be the first ripe fruit. That's how I would characterize it. So again, it looks like Nahum here is referencing this season. And then when we go to Revelation, I'm Xing these tabs as I read them so I can eliminate them because there's quite a few. All right, so Revelation 6:13, it's referencing the falling stars. We kind of have that imagination going whenever we imagine the end of the world, like falling stars and stuff. Well, here's the verse it comes from. So, and the stars of heaven fell into earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the mighty wind is mentioned in some other verses, primarily like Isaiah 11. It's the same wind that's going to dry up the Euphrates, which is happening now. And it'll split the sea at the head of Egypt too, where the Nile is. It's supposed to split it as well, because people are supposed to walk over it into Israel once again. So the fig tree is packed to the brim with symbolism. And I find it interesting how it appears in Genesis and Revelation, but also in the middle. And the fig's not necessarily a bad thing, though, because in Revelation, we also see that there are 7 churches judged by Jesus, and there's only 2 of them that are found fruitful. And that's the Church of Philadelphia, which is the Church of Brotherly Love, and the Church of Smyrna, which is a type of fig. Now, what's very interesting about that is Smyrna happens to be the female fig, which is edible. So what we see right here is a good example of a female fig. And there are the male figs, which are known as the goat figs, and you cannot eat them. They are naughty, actually. They're so naughty, you cannot eat them. That's the word that's used. So I guess tough and perhaps I'm not sure what makes them naughty, but you can't eat them. So there's a verse here talking about that. So Jeremiah 24:3. Then the Lord asked me, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" "Figs," I answered. "The good ones are very good," like one ones we see here, and the bad ones are so bad they cannot be eaten. It's kind of interesting to point that out because, again, the female version is Smyrna. Now, the horticulture of the fig is something that I can briefly explain, and that adds a lot to the mystery, because the fig can only be planted with a scion. You don't do it with a seed. And so you would take a branch and transplant it. And apparently it's very hardy and it'll just kind of take off. Although I've yet to do it. I want to try to take one off the tree at church and do this. But I was waiting until, I don't know, I can't remember if you got to wait till the sap lowers or rises, but I didn't want to do it at the wrong time. But anyway, measure twice, cut once, right? So anyway, as far as the, let me see here. Oh yeah, the horticulture of the fig. The tree fertilizes. So the male and female figs we were talking about there a moment ago, they are only fertilized by wasps. So there is a species of wasp for each fig species. So Smyrna would actually have its own particular type of wasp. And what I think is very, very interesting is that this fig tree prophecy is tied to Israel, the creation of the state of Israel, which hadn't existed for a long, long time until 1948. And so how is that possible? Well, today a wasp can mean something other than a wasp, right? So white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So I think in a lot of ways we fertilized the fig tree and it's come to fruition. So again, had I never studied the fig, that particular prophecy wouldn't make sense. But because we just a short study on the fig tree, and I can credit can't remember what the guy's name is right now, Shepherd's Chapel. That's the guy. He did a study on the fig tree, and it really opened up my eyes to a lot of things in Scripture. And you asked earlier about religion and what it meant to me and how it affected me maybe in my recent life. So about 5-6 years ago, when I learned the parable of the fig tree and really started studying it, things just started cracking open, the symbolism. And so, yeah, I know that was a lot on the fig, but I got one more here with the Song of Solomon. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. Because it's likened into taking a bride as well. So again, it's not all gloom and doom and judgment. There's also like this taking of a bride, because again, it ripens in Virgo, which is the virgin, the bride. So again, there's just so many layers. It's so fun.
Yeah, dude, beautiful stuff, man. I really appreciate all of the different things you're pulling from. And so it gives me just way more context and it feels way more holistic, right? The one thing I'll add to regarding the fig leaf, and the sort of sexual connotation with everything, but the idea that figs are good for testicular health. And so I just Googled it right here, and it says studies have shown figs increase the mobility of male sperm and increase the sperm count as well as overcoming male sterility. So to me, that's really, really fascinating, given the doctrine of signatures sort of connection and just the testicular nature of the fig itself.
Really puts the holy and holistic. And so,
yeah.
I didn't really go into detail about the wasp. So when the female wasp crawls into the blossom, it's stripped of its wings. So when you eat a fig, you're eating a wasp. It's been digested in within.
Wow.
I kid you not.
Dang.
So
that's
it's pretty bizarre, So every time you eat a fig, just sit there and ponder Ragnarok and what it means. And I got a couple more here about figs that aren't so prophecy based that I thought would be good to transition, because some of these others that we're going to talk about are more like medicinal and stuff. So Isaiah 38:21, Isaiah had said, prepare a poultice of figs and apply it to the boil and he will recover. I thought that was interesting. Never heard of making a fig poultice. And then here we got in 2 Kings 27, 20, verse 7, rather. Then Isaiah said, prepare a poultice of figs. They did so and applied it to the boil, and he recovered. So it's mentioned twice here. They're referencing that healing remedy. So I think it's kind of interesting how remedies or home remedies or wives' tales, whatever it might be, some of these things I think do have their origins probably in scriptures or even traditions. But those were the last two fig slides. So I have several more on different plants, but yeah, that was a big bulk of stuff. I had a lot on fig.
Nice. I'm just curious.
I love it.
Is the fig like because it was mentioned first fruit was mentioned a couple of times when you were reading some of these quotes, right? Is that more so specifically related to the fig, or are there other plants or fruits that are associated with this first fruit concept? Do you know?
Well, it's an interesting question because the first fruit thing applies to not just plants, but also animals. It's because in Exodus, we actually find the word matrix, which refers to the hymen of the vagina. So when you were talking about you were talking about bees being hymenoptera, right?
Yeah.
Back in the past. So that veil that is in the temple before the Holy of Holies, that is the hymen in a sense. So the firstborn to pass through that is dedicated to the Lord as a priest in the temple. And so that's the first fruit of your loins would be the first to crown. And that's, it was just a spoken decree by the Most High. So that's why there's a blessing associated with it. And I think that's probably why inheritance and things like that and kingship usually follows the firstborn, is because it's part of that divine right, whatever. I mean, you even find it in Nordic cultures and Asian cultures. I mean, it seems ubiquitous even. So it may not always be the case, but I think that it has something to do with the firstborn crowning. And so with plants, how this was kind of exercised in a way was not just was your firstborn given to the Lord, but your first crop was also given to the Lord. So the barley harvest is the first one, and that was actually before this, I think. But even now, I don't know if you'd still be harvesting barley right now, but the first harvest was barley. So the Jewish feast of first fruits, I think, applies to the barley harvest specifically. But Christ also fulfilled the feast of first fruits when hanging on the tree and being crucified on Good Friday. And so it was, we'll talk more about that Friday. But yeah, so I think that all applies.
Definitely. And then arguably too, Aries could be considered a first fruit. At least nowadays, it's the first sign of the astrological year, right, and all that kind of stuff. So it leads the way, for all the other signs. So yeah, and then also too, you mentioned crowning, and then Aries is very headstrong and obviously has those powerful horns and everything else. So lots of head symbolism going on right now.
The crown is the very top, and we share that in common with trees too. The top of a tree is its crown. So again, when you compare trees and humans, we both have trunks, we both have crowns. In a sense, we both have roots or root chakra or whatever you want to maybe call it. So in limbs. So there's a lot of different similarities. And I think that comes through a lot too. Usually trees are people in the Bible and mountains are nations. So all the trees on a mountain would be like all the people in a nation. So knowing that too, the Bible kind of takes on a different meaning a lot of times when you're reading it. So when the mighty wind comes and knocks all these trees down, it's like, well, that's like saying God coming in and doing that in a sense too.
Yeah.
Like a divine woodsman of sorts.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. I love this. This is really fun so far.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm making some connections here too with just the the birthing process and all these things, because figs are quite high in iron. And so it's actually good for a woman who might be pregnant, who is planning on giving birth, to, consume figs, maybe more on a regular basis for that. And, one of the things that comes to mind when you talked about shaking of the tree and then the fruits that fall. If we look at the thought that we're all stars, and I look at when you cut a fig in half, the amount of seeds in there, it's just pretty incredible. And so thinking about the testicles and then the sperm being inside the testicles, that being the seed, multiple seeds of possibility to be birthed, and then sent down to the ground. So those are a couple of things that came to mind as you were going through some of the stuff. And then lastly, what I learned about the almond tree is that almonds produce sweet almonds and then some produce bitter almonds. And like you said with the fig, there's figs that you don't want to eat. There's the male fig and then the female fig being sweet and edible. And then same kind of concept with the almond is that the bitter almond you don't want to consume because it's toxic. And whereas the sweet almond, that's the almond that will be harvested and then, used as food and oil and all those sorts of things. So.
Nice. I have to mention this. So men have more iron in their blood than women. And so that makes perfect sense too, because iron corresponds with Mars. And even under some systems, like the symbol for iron is literally just the Mars glyph or a variation of the Mars glyph. And then Mars corresponds with Aries as well. Right. And so Mars, iron, Aries, testicles, all this stuff. It's just one big weave.
That's a good one. And it should be mentioned too, Bub, you have a really good connection with figs because in Fresno, where you're from, they grow very, very well. And so I know that you have a very nice, connection and
I do.
feelings about the fig.
I'm fond of them for sure. Yeah, in the Central Valley where I grew up, I mean, there is fig orchards all over the place. And so there's more houses and urban sprawl nowadays. But I have memories growing up and it's just like, fig trees forever.
Very cool. All right. Well, shall we? Josh, did you have anything else on the fig?
Yeah. Okay. It just I was just thinking how they do kind of look like testicles, but also reminded me of like pregnancy, kind of gaining that ripeness in a sense too. And it just occurred to me because one of the prophecies talks about the tree only having leaves and it putting forth leaves. That's when the apocalypse is supposed to kick off. Well, that would be in Aries right now. It won't be until Virgo that it fruits. So I think with what we're seeing right now popping off, it may not be this spring, but a spring like this, perhaps, apocalypse meow. So, and the one last thing you mentioned, pregnancy, the Hebrew word Odin refers to travail or pregnancy pains, like birth pains. So I think it's interesting also how this also relates to the fig in a sense. So that shaking of the tree, that is the birth pangs, the Odin is arriving. So whatever that means, Ragnarok, in other words.
It also kind of reminds me of the placenta, right?
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Cool.
Very cool. All righty, on to the next. Olive. This is a beauty. So many uses for this plant. I mean, knowing that the olive oil, and then the oil being very sacred and mentioned quite a bit in the Bible as well. And lots of great uses for the olive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Lucas and we've talked about this. I'm not sure on which stream or whatever, but the process of actually acquiring the olive oil being very much kind of like a, in a way, kind of like like an alchemical process, basically, this refinement and all the things that are required and blah, blah, blah to produce oil and stuff. He found a lot of valuable symbolism in that whole process. But Joshua, what do you think about olives and the olive tree?
Well, the olive has some associations, of course, with peace and I think also mercy, because after all, it was, I think in Genesis 8:11, it says Noah knew the water was fully going down because the dove carrying a bough of an olive tree with green leaves in her mouth. So Noah therefore understood that the waters were ceased upon the earth. So it was like a sign from God that judgment was over. And then, of course, the rainbow was thereafter as well. So I would associate the rainbow with the olive. I love you, all of you guys, I love you guys. So anyway, the oil reference I thought was pretty cool too, because yeah, all of you, Jenny. G, I love you, Jenny. So and so they take the olives and press them, and you can produce this oil. So what we're going to see when we study the almond a little bit is it talks about the menorah having almond blossoms on it, all over it, and but it's filled with olive oil. And so it's interesting how in churches today they've tried so hard to run away from Judaism that they don't use oil lamps anymore. They use candles. And I think that because of that, they've lost the symbolism that went into that, because if you were fruitful enough to have enough olives to produce oil, you would have enough to fill the menorah. And this ties into the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. There's half of them have enough oil, which means they would have had enough olives. They were fruitful. And then the other half don't have enough oil, which means they weren't fruitful enough. They didn't labor when they should have. And so they're not prepared. So then they leave to go buy some more, and they're not at the meeting place whenever the wedding train, because it's like a caravan of sorts. The father comes with the groom to pick up the bride. And if you weren't there, you don't get picked up. So you're not part of the wedding train. So again, I consider the Aries to be like the locomotive of the zodiacal train, whereas Pisces would be the caboose, so to speak. So again, I would associate the coming of the father with the son to be very similar. You were talking about the astro theology of the plants earlier. I can't remember what term you might have applied to that, but what we've been seeing is Saturn and Jupiter coming through together over the past maybe year or two. And I couldn't help but wonder if that was maybe something that was hinted at here with that wedding, because Saturn is the father of Jupiter in most of the stories, right? So he'd be coming, and then I thought, well, who's the bride? So, and then of course, what do we see here happen recently with Venus? Venus was in the sky with Jupiter again. So I know these things happen occasionally and frequently, even in some cases, but I think that a lot of times when we're given these parables and prophecies, there's that hidden meaning, like, hey, hint, hint, this is probably going to be when the father and son are coming, in the sky. So again, that twilight language is being reflected to the stars, which of course the Hebrew language is based on the stars. So for me, it makes totally logical sense, but it's not always apparent to folks. But yeah, so the olive in this case is like a symbol of purity, in a sense. I mean, what do we call it? Extra virgin olive oil, after all. And so again, it ties to the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. So how would you produce olives or oil in that sense, that alchemical sense? Well, it would be exercising the fruits of the Spirit. So, if you're looking for opportunities to serve God and, help people out and so on and so forth, do the fruits of the Spirit, then you would be having a lot of olives, in other words, and able to produce this oil. But, the candle, like I said, we lose a lot of that symbolism there. And the oil lamps even used in Egypt too, a lot in the tombs. So it looked a lot different though, the lamps. But when you imagine the wise and foolish virgin parable, you can imagine them having those, little lamps. They're kind of cute. I'd like to get one because I think having it, I'd be able to better appreciate, maybe glean more from the parables,
Yeah, definitely. And oil in general is so valuable in so many ways. And olive oil is one of the more, when you get pure olive oil that is, organic, well grown, all of these things that we would prefer, to have in a product that we're purchasing. I mean, it can be a very spendy oil, because when you're getting something that's not mixed, a lot of the olive oils that might even be listed as extra virgin olive oil in the grocery store, a lot of them are cut with things like canola oil and what have you, or they're made cheaply and stuff like that. But, so many of these plants that we're talking about today, what I noticed the theme is that they're all very rich in just like very vital things to our wellness. And it made a lot of sense to me, because if these are some of the plants that are like the origins of our being, of the world, of the peoples that have been living here for however long it's been, it makes sense to me that they're such nutrient dense plants that typically have, like, they're high in antioxidants and things that will help to clear the system, things that will help you stay healthy and strong, something that's going to protect you. And with an oil, it's one of the best protectors you can put onto your skin. Not only is it going to nourish you, but it's going to give you protection. And so that is just one of the themes that I wanted to say that I noticed with all the plants and trees that we're going to be bringing up today, is that was the running theme. They're all very nutrient dense in a lot of ways.
Nice.
You mean they're not a weed? Because that's what we call a weed, right? It's something that doesn't have use. So, yeah, no, they're not weeds.
No, right. They're not.
Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to mention something else. Jenny was asking about what was the branch that Virgo holds. And, I'm not real sure. It may very well be an olive branch, or it might be an almond branch, because we're going to cover almond here in a little bit, and there are some verses that talk about, like, Aaron's rod, for instance. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'll do some studying on it to try and figure it out, but yeah, that in it. So let me read this real quick, because I thought this was pretty cool. So the biblical term for it in Hebrew, it's called Samek, and means branch, the brightest star in Virgo, and it means gloriously beautiful. So I don't know, it doesn't even say what it is. It just said it's a beautiful branch. So whatever it is, it's going to have fruit on it, I think, is the gist.
There's a few variations with this. And so with Virgo, it's not uncommon to see her holding a little bundle of wheat. And so I think that's interesting. There are other variations where it does look like it is an olive branch. But then I think the most common one I tend to see is actually it's a palm branch. And so, which I think is all very interesting. And obviously you go by Josh with a branch, and then the branch being a reference to Christ, And so what I tend to see is when Virgo is actually holding a branch, I actually think it's a substitute symbol for her child. Dude. I think that's really what it is. Instead of her actually being seen holding child like Isis and Horus, or the Virgin Mary and Christ, instead is holding a branch. Which kind of actually this plays into what I wanted to bring up regarding the nature of oil, and also butter and fats, I guess. But I see a very heavy mercurial connection with oils. So oils are like slippery, they're lubricants, right? Even just think of like motor oil or something like that. And Mercury is a very slippery figure. So he's kind of a shapeshifter. There's seemingly so many different things that Mercury is associated with. And just by the nature of fats, oils and butters and stuff too, they go through different phases, right? So they can be thicker and then thinner depending on the heat and everything else. And so to me, this kind of alludes to some sort of mercurial thing. The other thing about Mercury that I always think about is Mercury is connected to like liminal spaces. So the thing between things, the space between things. And oftentimes fats, oils, butters, and things like that, you're spreading it on something between the things. So even between the pan and the food, as an example. So I just see a lot of mercurial sort of symbolism with that. And then you also brought up the fact of extra virgin olive oil, and Virgo is actually ruled by Mercury. And so there's a heavy mercurial connection with Virgo.
I like that a lot. And then also oil. I mean, when you if you look up recipes for something, or specifically if you're making an herbal preparation with oil, a lot of times it'll be called a carrier oil. So in the theme of Mercury, carrying a message or carrying a thought or whatever, the oil can carry and harness the information or the nutrients or the medicine from a plant, and then it can be carried on and put onto a place or taken somewhere else, So that's really cool. I like the Mercury.
Excellent.
components.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, oil, honestly, I feel like at some point it's just bubbling up, but I might do an oil deep dive symbolically about what it represents, how it's used, how it's perceived. There's holy oils and anointing oils and all these types of things. And then also, because I brought up lubrication, just the dynamic between man and woman and friction and how oil obviously allows things to be lubed up and everything else. So there's lots of stuff going on there for sure.
I wonder if that was used back in the day. I mean, it makes sense, I guess, if you really think about it.
Yeah, I have no
For
idea.
that, So one more thing I wanted to mention is that so you don't get the juice unless there's the squeeze, right? So there's another layer to that fruitfulness is that usually the fruitfulness comes under pressure, whether that be like persecution, hard times, self-imposed, like fasting, flatulence, or not flatulence, but flagellation rather. So yeah, some of those things could produce the oil as well by putting it under pressure, because it's not until you squeeze it that you can get that oil out of it. So, in communities like the Orthodox Church, suffering is very glorified. So, you're not going to produce oil unless you're suffering, essentially, is kind of the theme that goes there. But that's an attitude not just of loving suffering, but it's like a veneration of the saints and martyrs and things like that too. So thanks. That was a lot of fun to weave on the olive.
Agreed.
All of you guys in the chat. Thank you for joining us. Oh, and one more thing. You're talking about holding Christ. So the Virgo glyph, it's Mary holding the fish. I saw that on Instagram the other day.
That's right.
Somebody pointed that out.
Yep.
So it does look like that. She's holding the fish.
Which Virgo's opposite Pisces. So
right?
It makes perfect sense, right? Yeah.
See, exactly. That's what this does. It's one thing after another, It's like putting a different set of glasses on, and every time you look at a new plant through the Bible, you start to see things you never saw before. So it's what I love about it.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
stuff, man.
And before we move on, Alan Marcus asked, what's the difference between a balm and an oil? And I would say that a balm is usually mixed with it's usually a mixture of oils that's like combined with beeswax or say cocoa butter or shea butter to make a thick kind of cohesive mixture that can be used on the skin or onto it can be used to anoint something, but and it's like made up of separate oils. So it's kind of like there's oils within balms, but balms and oils are two different things. But you would use oils to make a balm, if that makes sense.
Nice. Okay, I just have to say then,
yeah.
If you look at balm, you just flip the B and then it's palm, right? And so this lines up very nicely with more Virgo symbolism because the Hermit card corresponds with Virgo. And Joshua, we haven't talked about this, but or maybe we have on Instagram or something, but I'm pretty convinced now that when you look at the Hermit, he is actually like an advanced, aged Christ-like figure. That he is like a good shepherd type figure, and he always has his staff there, and he's kind of wearing his cloak sort of thing. And so I think this is really interesting because the Hermit card corresponds with Virgo, and he's always holding that lamp, right? He's holding that lamp, which is an anagram for palm, and then the Hebrew letter that corresponds with the Hermit is Yud or Yod, which means hand. So it's another reference to palm. He's sometimes substituted, within the Virgo illustration with a palm branch, and that lantern. It's my understanding that one of the deep encodes is that he's actually using olive oil in that lantern.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
and that I've also sometimes seen him. It almost reminds me of in the Valley of the Shadow of Death. He's got a light, one that never goes out. He doesn't lose his way. Sometimes you even see like a Star of David in that light as well, which I don't know if that's one particular tarot suit or not, but
no, that's common.
Yeah.
Though. Yeah. No, definitely.
What number is the Hermit again?
The Hermit is number 9.
Number 9. Well, that's Odin. Odin's number as well. So maybe there's some associations there with the birth pangs and things of that nature.
Yeah,
but yeah, I'd say it's
I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to agree with you that I think it isn't like an aged archetype, or in the Kabbalah or the man of the Zohar. He always has like a really long beard.
Yes.
So yeah, I would imagine him being like the hermit or Odin.
Yep, exactly. It's the good shepherd, just when he's older, going through his hermetic phase of solitude and everything else. But regarding the Odin thing is, I think there's a lot to say about Odin being a mercurial figure, and then also the hermit being a mercurial figure, a traveler, sort of messenger kind of guy, and then again corresponding with Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. So
Hermes, yeah,
that's right.
Word literally. Oh, I got a verse here for balm. It just might be a way to kind of kick off the next topic. What do you know what your next slide is?
Yes, it's hyssop.
Okay, this doesn't include that, but this is the one that I do have balm in. Genesis 43:11. Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift, a little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds." I like this because it mentions honey in the same context as the balm. And when I've made salves, I've used beeswax. So again, that hymen noptra reference with the wax there in the balm. So that, I don't know, that was just a really cool verse I wanted to share before we moved on.
Nice. I'm into it. Very cool. It's a shame almost. I mean, not really, but the olive tree looks so cool and epic. Some of these really old olive trees that we were Googling, and we just decided to show this because it shows the olives like nice and they're up close and all of that. So we opted for this, but the olive tree in and of itself like has a total presence to it, which I think is interesting. And they kind of like wrap around itself sort of thing. There's almost like this twisting sort of dynamic that kind of goes on with it. So just visually, some of them are pretty stunning.
Yeah, very beautiful. Reminds me just like tree of life stuff. I mean, all trees kind of symbolize that, but the olive has a very, very captivating look, and some sort of magic feeling like that for sure.
Definitely.
Next up on the list is hyssop. Beautiful hyssop. What do you think about this one, Josh?
This is a really cool plant because this would be the time of year. Would we harvest this right now?
Probably. It depends on. It would probably depend on where you're at. Like right now, like where we're at, there is really nothing in bloom. So I think it would depend on where you're located. Definitely.
Well, around the time of Passover, hyssop would be used in the Passover ritual. So maybe it hasn't bloomed yet. And so again, this is where it wasn't until it's just some bushcraft dude on Instagram cooking out in the wilderness. He had a bundle of herbs that he had just doubled over rather, and put some baling twine around it. And I was like, oh, that's how they did it. So they would have taken this hyssop for whatever reason, maybe just for its structural qualities, I don't know. And then they would have used the blood from the Passover lamb and painted their door with blood using hyssop. So that was it. So I don't know if it has like a herbal taste or something. Maybe it was partly used in the lamb dinner because they eat the lamb too. So let me read this from Psalm, which sounds a lot like palm again. Psalm 51:7. This is one that we read in Orthodox liturgy. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. So it almost makes me wonder if it wasn't also used in bathing rituals. Maybe it was like the washcloth in a sense, or something. I don't know. A paper towel. What do we equate that to today? I don't know. So I'm just interested to know what it might be used for. But in this context with Passover, it's making this reference here to being whiter than snow. Well, what you would do is you'd bring the lamb in around this time. And so right now it would be in your home and you would be closely inspecting its hairs, much like they do with the red heifer for white hairs. If it has too many white hairs, they don't use it. Well, you'd be inspecting your white lamb, right, and trying to find flaws in it. And so, you know, imagine looking down at the lamb, you're probably using one eye, right? So in my opinion, I think that this is probably, Hyssop is linked to the doorway already because of the painting of the blood. But also imagine being under the doorway with one eye. Well, delta or delet, delta is the glyph, the Greek glyph that we use for doorway, and it's a triangle. So the one eye in the triangle is like inspecting the lamb for impurity, or how we are inspected for sin, just like the eye in Freemasonry inspects the Mason's labor. So it's all a reference back to how white is your fleece in a sense, right? And so this is really tied to the concept of the blood of the lamb covering sin. And of course, I think it could even relate to Odysseus's story where they're trapped in the cave and they escape the Cyclops, who's at the door counting his sheep as they hold on to the bottom of the sheep to get out of the cave. So they disguise themselves as sheep to get out under the watchful eye of the Cyclops. Of course, they poke his eye out with a stick. But anyway, that's another place you'll find that eye in the doorway kind of symbolism there. And the Bible talks a lot about giants too. So I've often wondered what the connection could be there, right? But anyway, hyssop would be used after and in this lamb ritual, by the way, when they're eating this lamb during Passover, which occurs on the full moon night. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, but they had to be ready to bug out. Everything they owned was on their back and they had to be ready to leave. So they were standing there consuming the lamb, and then they had just taken hyssop and put blood on the door, and then the angel of death passes over. And if you had the blood of the lamb on your door, it didn't take your first fruit, your first son or whatever. So, so again, the angel of death in the triangle, and it's all tied to hyssops. And every time you see the eye in the triangle, think of hyssop and the angel of death. It's such a lovely story, and I know it's wholesome. But anyway, I don't want to dwell on the angel of death too much, but it's a really cool story. We'll talk about more on Friday.
Yeah, totally. And I don't even know if I mentioned it yet, but Josh was going to be joining me on Symbolic Studies on Friday. So we're going to continue the conversation and get into more biblical symbolism. I had never considered the one eye symbol being an inspection symbol of taking a careful look at something. That is fascinating. I love that.
Like
very interesting.
Does the Monopoly guy have a monocle or not? Isn't that one of the Mandela effects?
I think it is. I don't know if he does or not anymore. But yeah, exactly. That's what I thought about too.
Yeah.
Or like a jeweler looking through a loop or something, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think about with hyssop, I've been saying it hyssop. I guess it's tomato around here, but it is a very it's known as a carminative. So, and a carminative helps to stimulate digestion, helps with gas and bloating. And so one of the things you can do with a carminative herb is, like, if you're eating something fatty or fatty meat, perhaps a lamb, you would eat hyssop either right before or after, or you would consume like a tincture made of it, and it would help to stimulate digestion. So it will help the body to digest fats a little bit more easily. So there could have been something going on with that, and that could be very well a connection as to why they maybe even used it. And then there's like the purification that comes with hyssop usually happens in the respiratory system. And so it can be used for like a dry hacking cough, or, when people get like walking pneumonia or something like that, sometimes they'll have like mucus that kind of like lines the lungs. And when you cough it up, you almost like cough up these little chunks of almost like hardened mucus, sort of. Hyssop is good for that. And so it's also a bitter and aromatic herb, which kind of helps to move things around. So those were a couple of the things that just like came to mind when I was thinking about this connection. And then one of the things I learned too today from Saja Popham of School of Evolutionary Herbalism, he was talking about somebody that he knows who makes absinthe. Actually, was talking about adding hyssop to the absinthe, and it kind of adds an extra like spiritual um, uh, element to the absinthe that he's noticed that is not there in absinthe that does not contain hyssop. So just a few little tidbits to maybe think about why hyssop was so regarded in biblical times.
Well, it's interesting. So basically, the Jewish Passover meal, there's like several very specific ingredients and items that they have to have around. So as an example, they actually eat lamb. I was just looking into it the other day, and I guess it's an okay substitute to use chicken if you don't have access to lamb. But one of the things is actually a bitter herb. And so that's part of the celebration. That's part of the meal. And so the herb is myrrh, Marror. I'm not sure if you're familiar at all. But just when you mentioned the bitterness, I thought I would bring that up. And then Joshua, one quick question: do you know if the way the lamb was treated before it was sacrificed and eaten is that related to like a kosher law or anything, or is there like a dietary sort of like law or instruction that they had to follow? Is it related to that at all, or is it kind of something else? Are you aware?
Well, it is, at least in part, because their animals do have rights, and within the context of Judaism, they were treated with great respect. In fact, if you abused the animal, it was considered not kosher, because just like when you bruise a piece of fruit, you were bruising an animal, right? So you're bruising fruit, and it was against the law to bruise fruit. And so, for that matter, you're probably not really supposed to hit your children either, just for that matter. And I know it's probably, I've heard this before, although I don't know for sure, but I've heard it's Jewish custom not to punish your children up until a certain age. So that could be another reference to like some type of kosher thing where you don't bruise the fruit. And then, but at a certain age, they're expected to shape up, you know, and stop acting up or whatever. But so that would kind of remind me of like how they would treat your flock, you know, because at one time that was also considered your wealth. But in this particular instance with the Passover lamb, you were supposed to show it affection. So basically you were making it a temporary pet, one that you were going to eat. So you brought it into the house, you basically inspected it for blemishes, but also treated it like a pet and really gained affection for it. I'm not sure if they would name it or not, but you can call it salvation. So salvation, the lamb. And so what would happen is they would then give it a kosher death, which there's a lot of rules associated with that too. It usually involves slitting the throat with a incredibly sharp knife that doesn't have any barbs in it. It's meant to be a one-hit kill, in other words, to use video game language. And then of course the blood's drained out. And in normal circumstances, the blood would be, you know, collected and disposed of in other ways. But for Passover, they actually used the blood then to anoint the door frame. And I think it's pretty cool that we're talking about this because Michelle's symbol for healing home, it's 2 H's. And the name of God is Yud He Vav He, which has 2 He's in it. And so H is He. And so you would be painting an H, which is a door frame, you know, with your lamb's blood, or in some cases a window. It's a window or a door. And a door is not a door unless it has hinges. And, you know, it's got it's going to be a door frame, but it's not a house. Excuse me. A house is not a house unless it has a door. That's what I was trying to say. Gotcha. So the door is very symbolic here. So Hyssop has that relationship to a door, which I wouldn't have really normally associated with that, but it even starts with an H. So maybe, I don't know if it does have that H in Hebrew or not, but I wanted to read something here about absinthe. Traditional absences to obtain their green color strictly from the chlorophyll of whole herbs, which is extracted from the plants during the secondary maceration, which is like mortar and pestle or chewing. This step involves steeping plants such as petite wormwood, which I'm not sure, is that one on our list?
It is, yeah.
I got some stuff about it later. Hyssop and Melissa. That's interesting. Melissa is a term for queen bee. That's really interesting. Among other herbs in the distillate, chlorophyll from these herbs is extracted in the process, giving the drink its famous green color. So the green fairy itself, it's the spirit of the plants, as it were, it seems. But yeah, I was reading about this pretty intensely one day. This is not the link I had then, but it was talking about all the different varieties that have come and the different recipes, and it seemed like monks were the ones that really nailed it and had what was considered like the OG recipe. But it was a very complicated thing to make, and there was awards and stuff given out. There's a pretty rich history with absinthe. Actually, it's quite remarkable. It's like the original Dr. Pepper, 23 flavors or something like that. It's got lots of ingredients in
it. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love the absinthe weave, for sure. And I bet the Melissa is probably lemon balm, because lemon balm is Melissa officinalis. And lemon balm has a really large connection with bees, and it's said that bees are very attracted to lemon balm and the actual scent that comes off of the flowers. So just a little tidbit there.
Nice. I just wanted to throw in there the fact that you mentioned this bonding with the lamb, right? And so my understanding is they bonded with the lamb in their home for 4 days, and then the Passover meal, there's lots of symbolism related to 4. So there's this the 4 cups of the Passover meal and everything, which I think is really interesting because all of this stuff is taking place during Aries, and again, the Emperor card is the 4th card of the major arcana, corresponding with Aries, and all this other stuff. So the 4 weave is definitely potent right now for a few reasons with all this stuff.
Which today's 4/4, by the way.
That's right.
It is. I know. I noticed that a couple times. 4/4 at 4 p.m. was our go time.
Right?
Yes,
well,
totally.
444 is the gematria for my name. It's the gematria for Jesus and Joshua both. It's in Hebrew gematria, 444. There was one other thing about what you said, something about the lamb, that it was affection toward it in the 4th day. And yeah, that's what it was. The tarot card for the Sola Brusca deck for Emperor was the Mario card. So you are it as well. And
that's right.
I thought that was pretty cool when you covered it the other night.
Definitely. Yeah, no, good call. Exactly.
Very cool. Shall we move on to the next?
Sure.
All right. Okay, so we have frankincense right here. This is one of my all-time favorite resins. I'll just have to start out by saying that. And many people are familiar with frankincense along with myrrh, which we'll talk about as well, being, one of the most famous known substances, resins, trees mentioned and used in the Bible and in biblical times. So what do you think about this, Josh?
Well, it really resonates with me, I must say. So it's really popular even though it's not really biblical, it's in the story of the birth of Christ. The 3 kings of the Orient are said to have brought gifts, each one having a different one. One had myrrh, which is a lot like Mary and its associations with that, frankincense, and then gold. And just today I was going through my herb drawer and I stumbled across some monoatomic gold, and I thought, oh, was that what they were bringing in? Was gold, monoatomic gold, frankincense, and myrrh? These magi probably were alchemists, and so they were cooking up some monoatomic gold. They're like, we heard the Christ child was in town. Let's go take him some. We just cooked this stuff up. It's our first batch. I was like, it probably wasn't actual gold. It was probably monatomic gold. I thought they're going to start feeding this baby monatomic gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So I don't know. It was just a thing that came into my head earlier today. I hadn't really made that connection because I always just thought it was gold, right? But what would you really do with the gold? I don't know. So it started making a lot more sense then. But frankincense and myrrh are both used in the liturgy services in the Orthodox Church today. So if you go to like a Protestant church, you're not really even going to smell that stuff because they don't use it in non-Catholic style churches. But they also used it in the Judaic setting as well. And so the entire room fills full of this smoke, which my experience, it's very dry. So it'll dry your eyes out, it'll dry your skin out. It feels like it is literally scrubbing the air and everything that it touches. And so I could see why it feels, I don't want to say purgative, but it does seem like it's a cleansing type of thing, the smoke. And it's very, very thick. So if you do burn it inside, I would recommend using ventilation. But it has a very fragrant, pleasing odor. I like to burn it on the Sabbath day or just whenever I feel like it's needed. But it always leaves the house smelling very good, in my opinion. Not everybody likes it, but I like it. And but yeah, it's used in the censer. So whenever you see the priest going around swinging that censer, what he has in it is frankincense and myrrh. And what this is, it's basically our equivalent in North America would be like pine sap. So these types of trees over there in Africa, like in Somalia, you get some really good quality frankincense and myrrh from Somalia and Ethiopia. However, you might want to make sure that it's sustainable or ethically harvested. A lot of these trees won't even have bark on them. You know, as far as like, if hands can reach, there's no bark. So you only see bark on some of these trees from like 5-6 foot up. And it's really sad to see how, you know, they've been tapped so excessively to the point that some of them might even go extinct in these areas. So don't want to cause a run on frankincense and myrrh, but its days might be numbered, which I think are kind of prophetic if you really think about it. Because, you know, what would happen when is the spirit going to get upset when there's no more frankincense and myrrh being offered? You know, of course, in a lot of cases in the Bible, you're told not to offer anything but a contrite heart and a broken spirit. But there was a time when the temple existed that they did use this in services. But I think with the coming of the red heifer and rebuilding the temple and stuff like that, I think that we're going to see this stuff used again in Israel, in Jerusalem. But it's used widely in the Orthodox Church. I had to cough there. I don't know if the mute was successful or not.
You're good. Yeah.
But anyway, it's probably used as a gum too. Like you can chew on it. It has some medicinal effects like cleaning your mouth and whatnot. I've even heard that you can eat it and it's good for your digestive tract as well. So I'm sure there's some uses I'm unfamiliar with, but it does have a really big significance in the story of Epiphany, which means manifestation. Phanes is like the one that born itself, you know. So there's of course this mysterious birth of the manifestation. So it's kind of interesting how I got associated with that.
Right. Just want to mention too, Franken, right? Frankincense, and Frank being to be quite frank, you know, kind of straightforward, open, honest. And I know there's other Frank etymological connections that are totally escaping me right now, but I'm sure you can break that down and find all sorts of stuff going on with that.
You just reminded me, Frankenstein.
Yes.
It was his monster actually that got the name Frankenstein nowadays. But his monster was a zombie kind of thing in a sense, and it, you know, I of course don't like characterizing Christ as a zombie, but he is a resurrected being in the story. And what's really interesting about that is in Matthew, the only gospel that records this, as far as I know, at the very end of Matthew, when Christ resurrected on the third day, all the tombs opened up and people walked up out of them and walked into Jerusalem. So that's zombies, dude, straight up. So you see that frankincense and myrrh and things like that were also used in the Egyptian mummification rituals. They would actually pour liquefied myrrh and frankincense over top of the bodies to preserve them. So it makes me wonder, like, were these people that were coming out of the tombs, had they been embalmed? Embalmed. That's probably where that comes from, man. So had they been embalmed with frankincense and myrrh, and then were they being resurrected? I've heard that frankincense is associated with, maybe it's frankincense is resurrection, myrrh is priesthood, and gold, I can't remember which one's associated with which. I'm sorry, but yeah, they each have like their specific associations to what Christ represented, which goes back to the order of Melchizedek, some priesthood, which has no mother or no father. Incidentally, Christ has no father, or he has a father, but you know what I mean.
yeah, totally. Very interesting, dude. Yeah, Frankenstein came across my mind too, but you totally fleshed it out. That's fascinating.
Fleshed
Very,
it
very
out.
interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like this weave too, because what I came across is that when you're looking at frankincense and myrrh, frankincense is actually like the feminine aspect and represents the lamb, and then myrrh is the male aspect and represents the lion. And so I thought that that was really interesting and a very beautiful, pairing. Obviously with when you have the male, you have the feminine, and vice versa. And so that this pair is just so potent and has been used for centuries to just bring healing and clearing and cleansing. And the embalming is what I really love about it, because it's also, both of these can be used as wound dressings. So if you had a wound, you can use something like frankincense and or myrrh to protect the wound, to cleanse the wound, and to accelerate the healing of the wound. So there's just a lot of really reparative things going on with these two. And so when I think about just a healthy, relationship with a male and a man and a woman, there's like a lot of repair that happens constantly, because you're constantly helping each other repair one another and repair together as you're moving along in life. And so these plants and trees offer all these same sorts of elements to us in our lives for all the needs that we would have.
Nice. Yeah, no, exactly.
I do have a verse for frankincense, even though it's not associated with the birth story. It is in Revelation 18:13. We have here, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. It's just, I don't know. Let me see what the context is. Oh, lament over Babylon. So it'd be all the things that you could find there. Cargo of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, of fine linen, purple silk, scarlet, and all kinds of citron wood, and every article of ivory, precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble. So it was in with all that list of inventory there. And and they will say, the fruit of your soul's desire has departed from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be seen again. So that's the judgment on Babylon there. We're not going to have any more frankincense and myrrh and spice and cinnamon, which kind of goes along with like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The black horse symbolizes famine, and has the scales where he talks about a measure of barley for a penny and a measure of wheat for 3 pennies or something like that. So it kind of also signifies like an economic turmoil, which we've already been seeing that this year or two with all the transportation issues and oil and the economy crashing. So yeah, but one of the interesting things to note is that also in Revelation, during that time, God puts into the scripture, hurt not the wine or the oil. So even though all these other things are going to be restricted and hard to get, something about the wine and the oil not being interrupted. And I think that's to do with certain types of services, like unction uses the oil. That's sealing people with the Holy Spirit. And then wine's used for communion. So it's kind of interesting that it says that. So We'll see what happens.
Real quick, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free. If not, we can totally move on to the next slide. Do you have any thoughts regarding the role of these plants and things like that in ritual, and just the power of that, using some of these plants and whatnot year after year after year, and just kind of like the meaning behind that, because you're bringing up the fact that potentially there may not be frankincense down the road, etc. So I guess just what do you think about that in general?
Well, yeah, that's what I was kind of getting at earlier, is that maybe there's something about it that at least pleased the God of the Old Testament. He did like it at some point, and it was being used in the temple. So I think that, like we were talking about with the oils earlier, being a carrier oil, I think what the purpose of incense is it carries prayers to heaven. That's the way the Orthodox Church views it, for instance. So it would seem that, because it does talk about that in Revelation, how the prayer bowls get full. And so I guess that's what God's waiting on is for those prayer bowls to fill up, which may align with not being able to get any more frankincense and myrrh. It seems practical and logical to me. I can kind of see it. but yeah, so I do have a lot. Well, a lot more than probably most people do, but it's not enough to last the rest of my life. So I think, yeah, it's going to run out eventually. So if you can get it, get it. But again, it wasn't until I started buying it that I realized there's all these different grades, and it's quite an interesting thing to look into. And you can get some pretty high quality stuff if you know what to look for. I like the bigger chunks. The bigger chunks are, and the clearer they are, seems like that's the best quality. If you get the real granular stuff that you can't see through, that's usually seen to be like lower grade. So, if you were using this for church service or spiritual work, you would probably want to get the highest grade possible, just to, for best results, I suppose. But yeah, I kind of view it that way. So, in a religious setting, you would be singing the Psalms and doing prayers and stuff, burning incense at the same time. So you're lifting your prayers up in that way, and adding a fragrance to them as well, hoping that they'll be pleasing to the Lord, right? But if you're just going through the motions, it's not going to work. Like somebody in the chat mentioned myrrh is an amplifier, Rachel Sparks. Myrrh is an amplifier, so you need to be careful with it and very specific. If working on sadness, do it wisely, because you don't want sadness amplified. Well, if you're praying, then what's it doing to your prayers? So it's amplifying them, perhaps. So, and I must say, the room does feel awfully charged whenever it's full of the smoke of frankincense and myrrh. I take real deep breaths, and I feel like it cleans my lungs and stuff like that too, So I would say that, yeah, if you're going to work with it in any way, get to know it and appreciate, even like what I said earlier about how it's being harvested and stuff. So even looking into getting it, I would even pay more for it just to know I got it.
Right. It's really interesting. There's, in the Jewish culture, there's just so many holy days and rituals and things like that. And I know that there's like whole industries basically built around supplying all of these Jews all over the world with certain fruits and certain, leaves and things like that. Like, it needs to be very specific. And even though you live in like New York City or something, and these elements or fruits aren't anywhere to be found, there's, like I said, whole industries that are basically trying to get everyone what they need for this very specific ritual and everything. But yeah, excellent answer, man.
That's the same with the butchers. Everywhere you find kosher butchers, you'll find Muslim and Jews, because they also eat kosher. So, it's kind of, I'd really like to, I don't know how welcome I would be, but I would really enjoy kind of even just visiting or living closely to those communities, just to see. I think eating kosher beef would probably be a much better health decision too, because they were even talking about putting the what in the meat this week in Missouri. So and that's not kosher. So,
right.
We might all need to be going to kosher beef, if you eat meat, that is, or kosher animals, because that's a no-no, man. Totally. But somebody mentioned in the chat here about where this The smells are the best at recalling memories as well. And I think that that's true too, because, when it talks about the religion of your fathers, and a lot of times in the Bible, well, if every time they do these rituals, they're using certain smells and certain plants, so on and so forth, that wonder if that could get into your genetic memory, and by participating in these rituals, these services, these feast days, are you like awakening ancestral, DNA in a sense? It's like you're sitting there reading about Jacob and Abraham and Isaac and smelling the same smells that they would have smelled at the same time of year that they would have been doing it. And it's like, it's just really powerful when you start thinking about it. And that's the whole concept of Hashem versus Hasatan. Hashem are those that share in that fame and glory, and they have their names recorded in the text. And so, of course, the Nordic equivalent of that is like Valhalla, or in the Vedas, being recorded in the Vedic texts. So that would be like, imagine any flavor of that, they're all going to have their own associations with smells and things. And what I think is so cool about smell, because we talked about original sin at the beginning, smell was the only sense not blamed for the fall. The fruit looked good, tasted good, it sounded good with what the words she was hearing. The serpent was also pressed up against Eve, which is the word naga. And so there was a touch sensation too. And of course she was holding the fruit, but not once does it say anything about her smelling it. And of course you can't really sin with your smell either, as far as I can tell, unless maybe you consider perfume or cologne. That's the closest thing I can think of, is trying to make yourself alluring, but other than that, it's really hard to sin with the nose, right? So I think, there's something holy about the sense of smell. And when you think about it, that's 20% of your sensory input right there, so there, it is powerful, and it connects straight to the pineal gland area too, which is the Holy of Holies, if you compare it to the temple.
Right. Excellent. Great points.
Yeah, this is awesome. And Nomad, going on with smell, he's asking, were the incense in the temple putting people in altered states? And from some of my research, especially in Liber 420 by Chris Bennett, yes, the answer would be yes. And that's where the cannabis also comes in. So from research done, that cannabis was added to some of these incense and used as a means to alter consciousness in order to open up more channels to communicate with people on the other side, what have you, in some of these rituals. And it was reserved for the priest class a lot of times. But yes, there's a lot of evidence out there that points to altered states of consciousness happening with these incense being burned.
Which, there could have been mushrooms and stuff involved as well, like the
totally
communion wafer. You said the word communication. Well, that's communion with the spirits. Basically, they were trying to get to the level of being able to do that, effectively. And for them, it was very real. And I just think that, you're right. It does have this priestly kind of element to it, because when it's used in the church, all that stuff's behind what they call an iconostasis, which is like the curtain. So all the frankincense and myrrh stays back there. It's like considered holy.
Yeah, definitely. This is awesome. I think, shall we move on to the next slide?
Oh, one thing. Somebody mentions that the spirits talk about smell a lot. I think if you read in the book of Enoch, it talks about how the angels say that we stink, by the way, humans. When Enoch's taken into heaven, the angels complain that he stinks, because to them, he's just absolutely offensive. So our labor produces stink, and they hate it. But again, I think there's some connection to the nose being divine. Who knows?
Interesting. Awesome. Well, let's move on to frankincense's counterpart that we've already brought up quite a bit, but this is myrrh. So we've got an illustration of myrrh. I really wanted to show the spikiness of the branches on this plant, or this tree, I should say. It's really beautiful, and it looks similar to frankincense actually when you see the whole tree. And then on the right here, you can see where the resin is coming from the trunk and the bark. Yeah, and one of the other cool things about these plants, I mean, they're pretty, they love the desert. They love hot, arid areas, and the way they grow too, they look like that. They kind of have that like rough and tumble look about them, which to me kind of points to them having a very potent, important, protective medicine that it would provide, which is the resin, that we see here. And Joshua, I'll pass the stick to you now.
You got me thinking. I'm not real sure what the crown of thorns was made of that was placed on Jesus Christ's head, but it could have very well been myrrh, I would imagine.
I was just thinking that exact same thing. It made me wonder.
Definitely.
So after all, his gift when he was born was myrrh, and so then he dies. He's being given the same thing in a sense, and they were doing all this to mock him too. At one point, he's handed a reed as a scepter. So that's another plant that kind of comes up too during that story. But I got 2 verses here to read about myrrh. And mind you, there's so many more. I was just trying to pick the best ones that combined a lot of different verbs together. So let's see here. This is Psalm 45:8. And so, and all thy garments smell of myrrh and aloes and cassia, and out of the ivory places whereby they have made thee glad. So the context here is, my heart is stirred by the noble theme. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you above your companions with the oil of joy. And then it continues after 8 in verse 9. The daughters of our kings are among your honored women. The queen stands at your right hand, adorned with the gold of Ophir. It's interesting that it says that, because it says in the end days, the Ragnarok days, that righteous people will be as rare as Ophir. And that's like a type of wood. Gold and Ophir are considered very rare things. So interesting. And that was Psalm 45:8. And then Song of Solomon 4:14. I'll go ahead and read the whole context here. Solomon admires his bride. Your branches are an orchard of pomegranates with the choicest of fruits, with henna and nard. Oh, I got nardo oil. I got oils from the Holy Land, and nard's one of them. I always wondered what nard was. Well, here it is. With nard and saffron, and with calamus and cinnamon, with every kind of frankincense tree, and with myrrh and aloes, and with the finest spices. You are a garden spring, a well fresh water flowing down from Lebanon. The spice must flow.
Very beautiful. Yeah, this is such an awesome weave. Thank you so much for doing all this, because I'm learning so much, and people in the chat are loving it, and we're loving it. So this is great. Yeah.
So
I like. Oh, go ahead, babe.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go.
No. You said earlier that this is the feminine to the masculine frankincense. Is that what you said?
No, that myrrh is actually the masculine to the feminine. That's what I've come across.
Myrrh being masculine. Gotcha.
Yes, and associated with the lion, and then the frankincense being feminine, being associated with the lamb.
I see. Well, that makes sense with the thorns and everything. It just makes me wonder myrrh, and then I even thought of Mar, Mars, as in, and then you even look at the bark itself, and it's, kind of Martian looking a little bit with the resin and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but I just want to get that clarification.
You did note during your live stream on the Emperor that oftentimes masculine would be feminine and feminine would be masculine. So this could be an example of that, where it's a little bit swapped in a sense for some reason. And I think it's interesting also about the lamb and the lion thing, because Aries and Ariel are interesting words to look at. Aries referring to the Lamb of God, and Ariel translates to Lion of God. So the Ari portion of that word is both a lion and a lamb. And what do we say about this time of year? Is winter going out like a lamb or a lion?
Right.
So what's your guys' opinion on that? Is it going out? There's a lot of natural disasters going on. It's flooding a lot here, so I'd say it's going out like a lion here where I'm at because the wind's been fierce. But that's just my neck of the woods.
Right.
I mean, we've definitely had more of an intense winter, a longer winter. Than we did last year. So it does fluctuate quite a bit, but yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I've been kind of blown away to see how many natural disasters are going on, and tornadoes and floods and earthquakes and all the landslides. I mean, there's been a big whammies all over the place. That's for sure.
I notice sometimes, and I don't know if this is just a weird coincidence or not, but sometimes when it is storming, I'll burn. I got these little charcoal wafers. That's the best way to burn frankincense and myrrh, by the way. They got like gunpowder in them or something. I don't know what it is, but it's Three Kings is the brand actually. But you light one of those and set it in a dish, and it gets red hot, and then you put the frankincense and myrrh on it. And I found that if I do that during a storm, I have like a window over there that I'll open up and let it go out, and it stops the storm a lot of times. So I think whatever angry spirit is out there doing its job, when it smells that, it's like, oh, one of God's people are down there. I'll move on this direction or something. So I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I've noticed it a time or two that it actually stops really intense storms. So the next time it's a storming, try it out and see if it works. Let me know.
Yeah, I get the sense you're not crazy. I mean, these things have energies, and I mean, they've been used for as long as they have for a reason, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of to the point that Kyle of Tippy Canoe Herbs brought up, that, thorns on plants represent protection. That's like a plant of protection. And so myrrh having that protective aspect too, because, and it can be used. It's really great for actually mouth health. That's what we use it for. I put it in our tooth powder. Great for wounds. And if you're making wound healing salves or oils or something, myrrh and frankincense together are great to add to that. And to Rachel's point of it amplifying things, myrrh amplifying things, it really does. And so I've found that any medicine that you incorporate myrrh and frankincense together, but specifically the myrrh, any medicine you add it to, it amplifies the healing aspects of that. Just even from personal experience, what I've seen, and Ben Balderson talks about this as well. And he was actually the first person that I learned that from, and that frankincense and myrrh kind of like opening your body up to receive the medicine a little bit more too, is a way to look at it as well.
That's very interesting. Thank you for the support.
But yeah, definitely.
Maybe it's like a thorny to them, in a way, like maybe it has some type of warding effect. Like even though it's smoke, it maybe still has like the thorns in the spiritual sense too. Because like the Hebrew alphabet, some of the words have what are called tagen. And if you ever see like three little lines coming off one of the letters, those are supposed to be like thorns or spikes or swords that give those particular words like a pow. Like if you say those, it drives off a spirit or something like that. So the word is like a sword in that sense, like a weapon. Of course, we don't think of it that way, but nor do we think about the myrrh tree in that way. So I think it's entirely possible. So imagine saying your psalms in clouds of myrrh and frankincense. It's like a bunch of swords spinning around, So if you ever feel oppressed, that's probably a really good tactic to use.
Very interesting.
Throwing swords.
I love that. Yeah, and then literally within swords you have words, right?
Exactly. or the S word, the spoken word.
Indeed.
Nice.
Yep.
Well, one last thing I'll just throw in before I put the other slide up that I learned is that they harvest myrrh during Passover and the Feast of the Tabernacles, which I'm not familiar with the Feast of the Tabernacles, but I'm more familiar with Passover. So, I mean, at this time, they're harvesting the resin from myrrh, and they'll harvest the resins and things like that from other trees during this time of the spring. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting connection, and given we're talking about this right now, I want to just throw it in there as a little tidbit. Yeah,
because this is the first month of Nisanu. Nisanu in Sumerian translates to first fruits. So this entire month is named as, so this, when you're harvesting in this month, the frankincense and myrrh, or the myrrh at least, that would be a first fruit type harvest. So around the time of the barley harvest probably is when they would be doing that, because it's all, the barley harvest is part of the first fruits, which is in that Passover time. But then Tabernacles doesn't occur until the month of around Tishri, which is Virgo. And so you're harvesting now during the Lamb era for the Virgin era that comes, is it how many months later is that? I think, anyway, your Jewish feasts span from spring to fall. So you got your 3 in spring, you got unleavened bread, Passover, first fruits. Then Passover is, you count 50 days from Passover to determine Pentecost. Pentecost just means 50 count. And so they would use omer, little omer bread to count. And so they'd count 50 omers and put in the chalice, I think it was, and then also went into the Ark of the Covenant. And after 50 count, you got the Passover, so that's the midpoint between spring and fall. And that would be your lion association there, because that's like the July is the sheepfold gate, which is also the crab, of course. But imagine like a sheepfold gate. And of course, you got your lion beside that. Coming, after July, you got August with the lion. And then shortly after that, again, got Tishri with the Virgin once again. So that's really cool. And what I like about that as well is you got your first month, it's 7. First month and the 7th month. So Nisanu, the first month, Tishri, the 7th month. Together, it's 17. So we see this Q stuff all the time. But I think it's kind of interesting because you put Aries with Virgo and you get 17, which is Q. Q a lot of times is referenced in the Bible too, as like the Q Gospels, or these hidden Gospels that are very interesting to read, but they're not part of the canon. But they call them the Q Gospels. So, and men were required to go to the temple 3 times a year. Once in the spring for, I think it was unleavened bread, and then at Pentecost, and then again in the fall for Yom Kippur. And then Tabernacles followed that. So first you have Feast of Trumpets, then followed with Yom Kippur, which translates to Day of Judgment. So in my opinion, Judgment Day, or Ragnarok, is probably going to culminate in the fall, which, the fall sounds like the fig parable we were reading earlier. And then Tabernacles comes sometime after, I think 8 days after the Day of Judgment. And so I think, my interpretation anyway, is that the first bug out drill was Passover. I think during Judgment Day, Feast of Tabernacles is another bug out drill, because what you do during Tabernacles is you leave the cities, you go into the forests, and you construct shelters of branches. So all the types of trees and stuff we're seeing in the Bible, different species and stuff, you're using them as your shelter. And it has to be a structure that you can see through the roof of. You have to be able to see the stars. And you house yourself within that for 8 days. So I think that the reason for that is because whatever's coming, Judgment Day, as it were, we're not going to be in the cities when it happens. If we're keeping the Feast of Tabernacles, we'll be out in the forests. And that's, where are you planning? Well, they say run for the hills, right? So, I think that that's kind of where that comes from, is like the thought that you don't want to be in the cities when that happens. So I know that was a little bit of a segue there, but I see those feasts as bug out drills. And when you start
Makes
to look
sense.
at them that way, it's like a prophecy is there to basically be a warning. When all these signatures start to line up, pay attention. The season's upon you. So on and so forth.
Gotcha. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that makes total sense. I totally have a weave regarding Cancer being 9 months ago, and then the gestation period, and like the moment of conception and crowning and that. I'm gonna wait for
Right?
Friday because we're already 2 hours in.
It fits
How many?
perfectly into Friday.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. How many more slides do we have? I can't remember what number this is.
2, 3. Well, there are 5 more slides.
Okay.
So what we could do is we could how about what if we just talk about the date palm? Because I know that would that be, or okay, so we could even select. We have acacia coming up, pomegranate, date palm, wormwood, and almond. So if there's one of those that Joshua and Mario, if you guys have things that you really wanted to get across, maybe we can pick one. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, just first off, I think we could continue the conversation, Joshua, if you want, on Friday on my channel,
Yeah,
and
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
we can go through the rest of the herbs and plants and whatever. And Bob, if you want to join us, you can do that, and then we can continue the conversation essentially, so that we're not just leaving some of these slides on the cutting room floor, because I
like
definitely
a
want to hear
cliffhanger.
Joshua's opinion about some of this.
Yeah, I do as well. So yeah, I'm totally fine with that. If you wanted to do that and continue on Friday, and if Josh, if you're good with that, I'm totally fine doing that.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay.
I still had some links prepared, so I'll just keep them for Friday.
Okay.
Nice. So Joshua, what do you want to talk about as our last plant here for this show? Maybe we should let our guest pick.
Yeah.
Let's do acacia.
Okay.
Because
the
there's
next
some interesting things to talk about there that may not relate directly to what we'll be discussing Friday. So that might be the best one.
Okay.
That or pomegranate would be a good choice.
Well, here's acacia right here for you. Beautiful plant. Or tree, I should say. Jeez. But go for it, my friend.
In some cases, a shrub as well. And some people think that the acacia may have been the burning bush that Moses saw. Some say it was a creosote bush. Some say it was acacia. And if you think about it, a burning, I don't know if this would actually happen or not, but if it, let's say the bush was acacia and it was burning. Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, do those fumes produce an altered state? Well, could that have happened with Moses being in that burning, in the close vicinity to that burning bush rather? Could that have, done something to him? And so what's in that? Well, acacia contains DMT. So if you think about it, it's quite possible that he could have been, in a sense, tripping, and talking to God. And so he would have had the Godhead, in a sense, channeling or communicating directly with Yahweh in that instance. And they say that everything has DMT in it, all living things anyway. And just it depends on the amount. And so the acacia would seem to have an elevation of that particular DMT molecule, which is dimethyltryptamide. And what I think is interesting about dimethyltryptamide is it's chemically similar to melatonin. There's just a couple little tweaks here and there, and boom, you got DMT. So the dream, people take melatonin to go to sleep, and you dream really, a lot on it. So I think it's because you're kind of supplying your body with the constituents that maybe it doesn't already have, and it's kind of manufacturing that DMT it's more readily available, in that sense. So I also wonder too about the ramifications of taking melatonin too much. Are we going to interfere with our natural processes of DMT that occur like when we're dreaming and whatnot? So I would caution people about taking melatonin, because nowadays it's so popular. I have to also wonder how it's manufactured. So, there's probably some healthier ways to get it if that's something that interests you. But anyway, I just know that it's a popular sleep is a popular topic that comes up with my clients, and they're always taking melatonin. So I always ask them if they're dreaming and things like that. And it's just a topic that I find interesting. But But as far as the tree, the wood itself, it's used in the tabernacle to construct the Ark of the Covenant. And so this DMT infused wood, which may or may not have been the burning bush, is used then in the construction of the Ark of the Covenant, which contains the Omer count, which contains the, thanks. I appreciate that, Chance. So the Ark contains the almond branch of Aaron's rod, and it contains also the 10 Commandments. So it's quite an interesting thing to consider. It only contained a few holy relics, but it was given these very specific dimensions, how it was to be produced. And what I think is so wild about that is through some happenstance research, it was just through a weird coincidence that happened to me one day, I learned that I think it's 2.5 divided by 1.5 is the ratio that the ark was made in. And that happens to be the golden mean, or the golden ratio. And you see this in art and in music. It's 1.6 repeating. And so it's just, once you get just over half in a song that's using this anyway, you'll notice that the beat will change. They might loop the hook back or something like that, but like pay really close attention to just over half. And you'll notice this in art a lot. And they use this, I think they probably don't know what they're doing, but the ark itself kind of represents this work of art. It has the golden mean built into it. So I think there's something there. I'm still working on that nut to crack it, but there's a lot of mysteries involved there with the ark, and maybe that's something we can talk about more in the future. But yeah, other than that, there's another story about the Acacia that I think is interesting, and that's in the Masonic lore. When Hiram Abiff, when the High Ram is slain by the 3 fallen signs, I think are like Sagittarius, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn, or something like that. When they try to cover up their crime, they bury the body and they put a sprig of acacia on as the marker of the grave. And it's then Aries, and this is what they say in the story, that one of the laborers comes and finds the body with the sprig of acacia. And a lot of references say that that's Aries, discovers it. And then Solomon comes to bring him back to life with the strong grip of the lion's paw. So again, we get that lion symbolism that comes in Pentecost. Now, of course, it doesn't resurrect him completely. It's just his skeleton, which is very Saturnian to me. But he doesn't have a spirit. He just has it's just the body, not the soul, or something like that. So the shin, that's something we'll talk a lot about Friday. The shin was missing they lost the word. And the Freemasons have been looking for that word ever since, the one that they lost with Hiram's death. So what they know today was only able to accomplish, a semi-resurrection. So, and that's what Christ's name is Yeshua. It contains that shin element. So it's like an improvement upon the Hiram Abiff legend. He didn't have it, but Christ did. So I like to compare the two stories there because it's really awesome. But acacia is probably one of the holiest plants in the Bible because it was, the box that contained all those holy relics. So yeah, I hope I did justice to the acacia. I'm sure I left some things out, but if you want to commune with the Most High, you got to get some potent plants, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's a really great way of saying it. And yeah, I saw. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you just reminded me because you brought up a Freemasonic connection, but sometimes Virgo is also holding the sprig of acacia. And I've talked about the Weeping Virgin illustration, Freemasonic illustration, like a number of times over the last year. And that is what she is holding in her hand, is the sprig of acacia. So I know that there's a funerary correspondence with that, for sure.
In fact, she's standing there. Oh, pardon.
No. I was just going to say, I would absolutely love to continue the conversation regarding the Ark of the Covenant as well.
Yeah, man, Indiana Jones vibes. When she's standing there with that sprig of acacia, almond palm, whatever wheat, Saturn's counting her hair, her locks, and she's standing there studying the Torah on top of a broken pillar. And so that broken pillar is the beautiful. You got Joaquin and Boaz, and one represents beauty, and the other, I can't remember. I'm so embarrassed I can't remember. But anyway, one's strength and beauty. That's what it is. So beauty is slain. Hiram Abiff is slain. Christ is slain. So she's weeping over the broken pillar of beauty. Just like Balder the Beautiful in Norse, he too was slain with a sprig of mistletoe, kind of similar in this sense. Yeah, I think that's all I can remember about the acacia.
Nice, dude. Wow. You're giving
Very
me a lot
beautiful.
of good stuff to chew on right now. So I think it's great.
Yeah, me as well. And one thing, when I was researching the acacia, and Gordy Two Shoes actually brought it up in the chat, and I'll confirm. But he suggested that the thorns of Christ's crown were acacia, and that is what I came across today. So there's another weave there with that. That I know we kind of maybe speculated it was maybe the thorns of myrrh, but it could have been both. Who knows? I mean, but that's what I came across when I was researching it anyway. So kind of an interesting thing just to deepen the weave here of how important it was, really.
That makes sense to me. Either way, it makes sense. But again, they were doing this to mock him. So it would make sense if this is they call him the King of the Jews. They put that on top of the cross. So it would make sense if they were mocking him by using the same wood that they would have used to make the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark. So yeah, it's a good solid weave.
For sure. Well, with all of that said, and if we are going to, carry on Friday, let's bring it back home. And I want to give you guys a chance to just, plug your stuff and shout yourselves out if you'd like to, and let people know where they can find you. So, Joshua, why don't you get that all started for us?
You can find me on Telegram as Joshua the Branch. I hang out a lot with the Interverse crowd, Weaving Spiders Welcome. I haven't been on Saturdays very much lately because my friends started doing Dungeons and Dragons, and I've never got to play before. So I'm going to try to hop on Wednesdays a little more often. But you can also find me on Instagram as Appalachian Aesthetic. Reach out to me on any platform, ask questions if you want to collaborate, do some streams together. I really enjoy doing this sort of thing. My life has, changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, meeting all of you folks. So everybody's really added a lot of happiness to my life. So these things, this is a lot of fun. I just enjoy it. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh yeah, you got it. And I second that. And thank you for the suggestion. And I just love communicating with you, getting to know you and learning all this stuff. This is great. There's so much to learn. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. And, be sure to join us Friday, guys. Don't pass over Mario's stream. We'll see it.
Yeah.
No, that's going to be fun, man.
And babe, go ahead.
Yep. No, I'm looking forward to that. So Mario from Symbolic Studies here, symbolicstudies.com. I'm on YouTube under Symbolic Studies, Instagram, symbolic.studies. And yeah, the next thing I'm going to do is talk to Joshua here more on Friday. So that'll be a good time. And thanks for suggesting and just prompting the conversation, man. There's more follow-up research I want to do with some of the things that you mentioned, and there's a few notes, a few hanging chads, loose ends that I want to wrap up on Friday. So yeah, that'll be fun. Excellent show,
Thank
guys.
you.
This is great.
Mini meows.
Yes, this is very nice. So I'll drop you fellas off, and for anyone who wants to stick around, I'll dish out some updates for y'all. So you guys have a really great night, and I'll be seeing you soon. Especially you, babe.
Farewell.
All right, bye-bye. All righty, y'all. Thank you so much for hanging out. Woo, that was a good one, man. Wow, I've learned so much, and yeah, I'm so just taken back by all this information. And as I said earlier in the show, as a person who doesn't know too much about the biblical side of things, gosh, am I inspired to dive into this literature, the traditions, the stories, the culture a little bit more, so I can just add it to my arsenal of knowledge, right? And this was just really, really great. So I'm very excited you guys were here. And now let's do some updates. So I'm going to fly through some of these because my update slides are at the end. So next week's show is the Cannabis Roundtable. This is going to be my first. Well, no, it's not my first time having. It's going to be my first time having more than 2 people as guests, because next week I am going to have the honor of hosting Benjamin Balderson, James of Grounded Extracts, and Lee Thunder Chicken. And we are going to get down with some cannabis, and we're going to just talk cannabis. So we're going to just talk about our experiences with it. We're going to get into extraction methods, people's stories with it, how it's come into their lives, how it's helped them in their lives, how they see it help other people. And I'm just really excited to be able to have these fellas join me, and we can just throw down on this plant that we all really love very much and have some really deep connections with. So you can join us next week, April 11th at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we'll get down with some Sacred Green. As always, last Thursday, every Thursday coming up this week, this Thursday with Mario and I. As I've said once, I'll say it again. We're loving this live stream. We're loving where it's going, and we're loving how it's teaching us lessons and how we are trying to improve it every single week. So come and join us on Thursday at 6 p.m. here on the Healing Home, and we'll get into it. As always, patreon.com/the healing home. I've already announced my full moon offering for the month to my patrons, so they are already aware of what's going on. So you can also be aware of what's going on. If you become a patron, you'll be able to know what my full moon offering is a day or two early before everybody else, and you'll get the option to be able to purchase before everybody else. So head on over to Patreon if you are interested in that. I still have 2 bottles of my Strong and Serene tincture, which is the offering from last month. This one is so freaking awesome. I mean, I'm just so happy with it. A lot of people that ordered it have reached out and talked about how happy they are with it as well. I had some success with our cat Carl using it as well. So it's a really great one, and I'm going to be making this more of a staple product for me in the future, just because it's just so lovely and lots of people liked it. So only 2 left. If you're interested in getting yourself a bottle, reach out to me. And here up on the screen is my menu. As always, I've got 2 CBD whip body butters left. Again, another one that is definitely becoming a very quick favorite of mine and Mario's and all the people that have been buying it. I've had some just really great reviews lately and people reaching out, giving me feedback, and I really appreciate the feedback. It always helps because not only is it awesome and very rewarding to hear that people like the products that they're getting, but it motivates me and it just helps to validate, that this medicine is helping people and they're receiving it, they're feeling the love, and that just to me is seriously so rewarding. So thank you to everybody who's been ordering and placing orders and reaching out and giving me reviews. It really does go a long way. So yeah, the CBD body butter is an orange cedarwood scent. And as I said, I only have 2 left, but I'll probably be making it pretty soon because we love it here too at the house. So we tend to go through it fairly quickly because we're both using it almost on a daily. And I'll just say it's a lovely massage balm. It's really, really nice right before bed because of the CBD in there. It's just very calming to all the senses and really helps the whole body and mind and spirit and heart just really relax a little bit. Takes the edge off, I like to say. So that's a really great one. michelleshealinghome@gmail.com for any orders, questions. You want to maybe sign up for my newsletter. You can do that on the website, michelleshealinghome.com. You can also find out about my other offerings like consultations. You can learn more about that. You can read my blog. I have a running blog that I've been, working with for the past 2 or 3 years now. So there's plenty of recipes on there and articles, things to just, stimulate you, make you think. So otherwise, you can text me at 503-568-1569. If texting is more of your jam, go ahead and do that. And as you guys all heard, Mario is doing his live stream with Joshua on Friday. Probably I don't think they determined a time, but it's usually around 6:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time when they start. So you can head to Symbolic Studies on YouTube and you'll be able to hear the rest of that conversation. And maybe I'll pop in and we can finish up our herbal remedy side of things. And then I'll let those fellas just flow. So with all of that, that's all I got for you guys. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. This was a really fun one. It's always so nice to see everybody in the chat. I try and maybe throw things up on the screen, try and find the balance of watching the chat and making sure I'm paying attention to what's happening in the conversation. But you all get it. I say that almost every time, but really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope the sun is shining where you're at. All righty. Take care.